In the first week of July 2025, as trash piled up and the summer heat baked the streets, a family in Philadelphia lost a father, a husband, a son. For our story, we'll call him Leo Rossi. He was murdered, and his case would go unsolved. But this isn't just another tragic story of urban violence. The investigation into his death was born into chaos. The golden hours for any homicide investigation were lost, not to a brilliant criminal, but to a picket line. The family's search for justice ran headlong into a city where sanitation workers, and even the staff of the medical examiner's office, were on strike. This is the story of what happens when the infrastructure of justice collapses, and a family is left to wonder if their loved one's killer got away, not by chance, but by the circumstance of a city in turmoil. What happens when the system designed to protect you is paralyzed? What happens when a family's desperate cry for help is met with silence? Not because no one cares, but because no one is there to answer. In the sweltering heat of July 2025, the city of Philadelphia found itself in the grips of a man-made crisis. A citywide municipal strike brought the nation's sixth largest city to a grinding halt. This isn't just a story about picket lines. It's about the hidden costs that ripple through a city when its essential services vanish. To understand the true human toll of this paralysis, we're going to explore a story that captures the terrifying reality of that time. It's a narrative about a family's search for justice for a brutal murder, a quest that got tangled up in the city's struggle with itself. It is critical to state up front that the murder case we will detail is a fictional reconstruction. The victim, Leo Rossi, is a character we created to illustrate the profound risks of the strike. The conditions he faces, however, in the breakdown of the city's systems, were terrifyingly real for the people of Philadelphia. This story forces us to ask a chilling question. When the guardians of a city walk off the job, who pays the ultimate price? Before the silence, there was a simmer. The tension between Philadelphia and its largest municipal union, AFS-CME District Council 33, had been building for months. DC33 isn't just one union. It's a coalition of over 9,000 workers who are the lifeblood of the city. They're the sanitation workers, the airport maintenance staff, the clerks who process permits, and the school crossing guards. Crucially, they also represent forensic technicians at the medical examiner's office who uncover the secrets of the dead. For months, negotiations with Mayor Sherrell Parker's administration had stalled. At its heart, the fight was about money. The union argued that its members, with an average salary around $46,000 a year, were falling desperately behind the cost of living. They wanted an 8% annual raise over 4 years. The city, meanwhile, called its own offer of roughly 13% over 4 years historic, pointing to the city's tight budget. To Philadelphians, it was a familiar political drama. To the workers, it was about survival. As the June 30th contract deadline loomed, the union held a vote. 95% of its members authorized a strike. It was a clear message. If a deal wasn't reached, the engine would stop. Many locals watched with a sense of dread. They remembered the infamous 1986 trash strike, but this felt different. The list of affected services was staggering. The union warned of a potential shutdown of health centers, crippled airport operations, and strained emergency services. The city assured the public that emergency plans were in place and that police would fill in for dispatchers if needed. But a sense of unease crept in. As the clock ticked past midnight on July 1st, 2025, they were about to find out what would happen. The picket signs went up, the workers walked off, and the city plunged into the unknown. The first day of the strike dawned with an unsettling new reality. The most obvious sign was the trash. Curbside collection was suspended indefinitely. All across the city, from South Philly row homes to the Northeast, garbage bags began to pile up. The city's temporary drop-off sites were quickly overwhelmed, and the neat piles became sprawling, foul-smelling monuments to the crisis. It wasn't just an eyesore, it was a public health hazard in the making. But the impact went far beyond sanitation. City libraries and public pools shut their doors. Recreation centers curtailed their summer programs for kids. The rhythms of daily life were thrown off. The city scrambled to implement its contingency plans, reassigning non-union workers to cover critical roles. But it was an impossible task. You can't just replace the institutional knowledge of 9,000 trained employees overnight. The most frightening consequence, however, was the one you couldn't see. It was the impact on public safety. The city assured residents that 911 call centers would remain operational, with police personnel moved from the street to handle dispatch duties. But they also warned of longer wait times. In an emergency, every second counts. A longer wait isn't an inconvenience. It's a window for tragedy to strike. The strike had created a city on edge, where the familiar assurances of civic life had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of vulnerability. It was in this climate of chaos that a man we're calling Leo Rossi would take his final breaths. To understand the human cost, let's imagine a man named Leo Rossi. At 48, he was a husband, a father of two teens, and the owner of a small hardware store that had been in his family for generations. He was the kind of guy who knew his customers by name and always had a story about the Phillies. He was a piece of the city's fabric. On the evening of July 3rd, the third day of the strike, Leo was closing his store late, around 9 p.m. The streets were tense. The news about the strike, the sight of trash piling up, and the oppressive summer heat had frayed the city's nerves. The details of what happened next are tragically sparse, the kind of painful fragments we're imagining the Rossi family would replay in their minds 1,000 times. The theory for our story is a robbery gone wrong, a crime of opportunity in a city where the normal patterns of life had been broken. There were no known witnesses. The call to 911 wasn't made by a bystander, but by his wife Maria an hour later. Worried sick when he didn't come home, she had called his cell phone again and again. Finally, she drove to the store. What she found would shatter her world. Leo was on the ground near the back entrance, his keys still in his hand. The cash register was empty. He was gone. In a normal world, this is when the system springs into action. Police, paramedics, detectives, crime scene techs, all descending on the scene in a frantic race against time. But this wasn't a normal world. This was Philadelphia in July of 2025, and his family's agonizing quest for justice was only just beginning. The first 48 hours after a homicide are what investigators call the golden hours. This is when the trail is warmest and the chances of solving the case are highest. For the murder of Leo Rossi, these golden hours were lost before they even began. When Maria Rossi finally dialed 911, her call entered a system under immense strain. Instead of a seasoned dispatcher, her plea might have been answered by a police officer pulled from the street, unfamiliar with the complex protocols. While there's no way to know exactly how many minutes were lost in our fictional scenario, for a family in this position, every second of delay would feel like an eternity. When officers finally arrived, they walked into a tough situation made worse by the strike. The police department itself wasn't on strike, but with personnel redirected to backfill striking workers, resources were stretched thin. The most significant roadblock, the one that became a symbol of the real-life crisis, was the state of the medical examiner's office. In a homicide, the victim's body is the most crucial piece of evidence. The work of the medical examiner can reveal vital clues about the weapon, the struggle, and maybe even DNA from the attacker. But on that night, the medical examiner's office was effectively closed. Its staff, from investigators to forensic technicians, were on the picket lines. In our story, Leo Rossi's body couldn't be moved. He remained where he had fallen for hours longer than he should have. The golden hours were ticking away, and the most important piece of evidence in the case was at risk, not from the elements, but from the paralysis of the city itself. The heart of any death investigation lies within the medical examiner's office. But in the first days of the DC33 strike, Philadelphia's morgue had fallen silent. The walkout of its 31 unionized employees had brought operations to a standstill. This created a horrifying and very real backlog. By July 3rd, the situation was a full-blown crisis. Court filings from the city later revealed the grim details. The morgue, with a capacity of 160, was storing over 180 bodies, forcing staff to place 2 bodies per bed. The city's own chief medical examiner called it overcapacity and worried the entire refrigeration system might fail. For a family like the fictional Rossis, this abstract crisis would become a deeply personal agony. Their loved one, a victim of a violent crime, was now part of this backlog. The delay was more than emotional torment, it was a direct threat to the investigation. The city's own lawyers laid out the stakes in a plea to the court. They argued that delays in processing bodies, especially in the July heat, accelerated decomposition. More critically, time degrades toxicological evidence. The window to gather this fleeting evidence was closing with every hour that a body remained unprocessed. The Rossi family, as we imagine them, would be trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. Their calls for information met with apologies about the strike. There was no one to perform the autopsy. The silence from the morgue was deafening. This was the hidden cost of the strike, where murderers could potentially escape justice because the tools needed to catch them were locked behind a picket line. As days bled into a week, the imagined Rossi family's grief would have hardened into a desperate resolve. They had to find the person who had stolen Leo from them. But seeking justice in a city that's closed for business is a lonely struggle. They started making calls to the homicide unit, hoping for any sliver of progress. They'd be met with voicemail or a polite explanation that resources were stretched thin. The detectives weren't being dismissive. They were being honest. The entire department was in emergency mode. In our story, Leo's 17-year-old son starts walking the streets around the store, asking shop owners if their security cameras caught anything. He was doing the legwork he imagined detectives should be doing. Maria tried to get a meeting with the lead detective, only to be told he was juggling too many cases. Every unreturned call felt like a dismissal of her husband's life. It felt as if the city had decided its own disputes were more important than a murder. Their frustration was compounded by the news. They watched reports about headliners like LL Cool J and Jasmine Sullivan pulling out of the 4th of July concert in solidarity with the workers. While they might have understood it was a bitter pill, the world seemed to be paying more attention to a canceled concert than to an unsolved murder. This experience is amplified 100-fold by the strike. It wasn't just that the system was slow, the system was broken. They were fighting for attention against a citywide shutdown, screaming into a hurricane. On July 3rd, the same day our fictional Leo Rossi was murdered, the city's attorneys made a desperate move. They filed an injunction to force essential workers back to their posts. Their legal filings contained a stark warning about the emergency at the medical examiner's office. The city laid out its case in alarming detail. They described the overcrowded morgue as a public health risk, but they also argued that the strike was jeopardizing homicide investigations because time was destroying crucial evidence. The city was officially admitting that the strike was hindering its ability to solve murders. A judge agreed. The ruling was blunt. The judge declared the situation created a clear and present danger or threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the public. All 31 striking employees of the medical examiner's office were ordered back to work immediately. For a family like the Rossis, hearing this on the news would have been a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, it was validation. A judge had confirmed that the strike was compromising the search for Leo's killer. There was a surge of hope that now, finally, the investigation could begin. But that hope was tinged with bitter frustration. Why did it take a lawsuit to get the city to do its job? Days had already been lost. The trail had gone cold. The victory felt hollow. It was a sign their case mattered, but also a horrifying reminder of how easily it had been cast aside. Justice wasn't an automatic right. It was something that had to be fought for, not just against criminals, but against the very system that was supposed to be its guardian. After more than a week, the strike ended. On July 9th, the city and DC33 reached a tentative agreement. The picket lines dissolved. For most of Philadelphia, it was a moment of relief. Sanitation trucks began the monumental task of cleaning the streets, and a fragile sense of normal returned. But for a family like the Rossi, there was no return to normal. The end of the strike only brought a clearer, colder understanding of the damage. The investigation into Leo's murder finally moved forward, but it felt like a recovery mission. The autopsy was completed, but the report likely would have noted the delays. Detectives resumed canvassing, but a week later, memories that might have been sharp were now fuzzy. Security camera footage that Leo's son had tried to gather might have already been taped over. The trail had gone cold. What should have been a priority homicide felt like a cold case from day one. The killer had been given a week-long head start, a gift of time and anonymity, courtesy of the city's paralysis. In the weeks and months that followed, the case would have stalled. No new leads, no witnesses, no arrests. The reward for information, the standard $20,000 the city offers, would feel like a hollow gesture. The Rossi family would be left in a state of agonizing limbo, haunted not just by the violence, but by the unanswerable question. If the strike had never happened, would his killer be behind bars? They would never know, and that uncertainty is a unique and cruel punishment. The story of Leo Rossi, while a constructed narrative, illustrates a troubling truth the DC33 strike laid bare. The systems holding our cities together are incredibly fragile. When they break, the cost is paid by those who find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, needing a safety net that is no longer there. Leo's case exposes the fallacy of dividing city services into essential and non-essential. The strike proved how interconnected these systems are. The shutdown of the medical examiner's office, a service most citizens never think about, directly and catastrophically impacted the pursuit of justice. This story forces us to confront difficult questions. How should a city balance the right of its workers to demand fair wages with its duty to protect its citizens? The workers of DC33 were not villains. They were people fighting for their livelihoods. Yet the consequences of their action were profound. The ultimate tragedy of a case like this is that it creates two sets of victims. The first is the victim of the crime and their family. The second is the public's trust in the institutions that are supposed to protect them. When a family is left to wonder if a murder went unsolved because of a contract dispute, that trust is shattered. The legacy of the 2025 strike isn't just in the contract that was eventually signed, but in the lingering question of what and who was lost in the process. The story of the Rossi family is a powerful reminder that debates about city budgets and labor rights have real-world life and death consequences. This narrative, born from the chaos of the 2025 Philadelphia strike, compels us to think critically about the cities we live in. So what do you think? How should a city prepare for a situation where essential workers go on strike? What's the right balance between honoring labor rights and ensuring public safety is never compromised? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe. We'll continue to follow the long-term impacts of events like the DC33 strike and share stories that explore the intersection of justice, community, and systemic failure. By staying informed, we can all advocate for a system that is more resilient and more just for everyone. In the end, this is a story about a void. The void left in a family by a violent death, and the void left in a city when its foundational services disappear. The fictional case of Leo Rossi is a cautionary tale, a personification of the anxieties that gripped Philadelphia in July of 2025. It shows how a labor dispute can cascade into a human tragedy, measured in lost time, lost evidence, and potentially lost justice. The strike is over. The trash has been collected and the city has moved on. But for families like the Rossis, whether real or representative, the aftermath is permanent. They are left with the silence, the unanswered questions, and the chilling knowledge that when their moment of greatest need arrived, the system was not there. It leaves us with one final, haunting question. What is the true measure of a city? Its skyline? Its economy? Or is it found in its ability to deliver justice for a single citizen? What would you do if you were in that family's shoes?